Good afternoon. I come to you all on a stunningly beautiful Minneapolis day. So I think I'm going to do this in a fairly extemporaneous and freewheeling manner so I can get it done and then go outside and enjoy the weather. It's one of those classic days where you say to yourself, yeah, this is why I live here. This is why I put up with the dark days and the bitter cold of the depths of winter, and then also the brutally humid days in August. This is what we're here for. So you'll excuse me is what I'm saying if I'm doing this a little bit off the cuff. Now, this is my April wrap-up. I was going to do this on Monday as part of my weekend endnotes, but two things happened. First of all, we had the weekend, and then we had the week itself. My weekend was a lot of fun, but it was a little bit more active than I'm used to it being. On Friday, I worked out at the gym, and then I went upstairs, and I know this sounds insane, but the gym I work out has a bar in it, and I had gone upstairs, and there was people I knew there, and they called me over to watch a little bit of the Timberwolves game with them, which was coming up. It was later in the night, so I did that and stayed a little bit longer than I intended, let's just say. And then the next day, Saturday, I woke up, which frankly was a minor miracle. I woke up to calls and texts from one of my best childhood friends. I didn't hear them when they were going off, not just because I was sleeping so heavily, but I have all notifications completely silenced between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., so I wouldn't have gotten them either way. But I saw those, and he said, you know what, I have the canoe, he has a canoe, on the top of the truck, and I could come down and we could take it out on the chain of lakes here in Minneapolis, which I live right by. So I got up, made myself decent. I went out, grabbed some breakfast, met my friend, and threw a few beers in a cooler beforehand. Then we took out the canoe, and we were on the lakes for a little over 3 hours, I think it was. And I got some sun. I don't know why, but I was just out there in a polo, which was stupid because I have the worst farmer's tan now in the world. I should have worn a tank top or just no shirt at all. And then I was at the gym a couple days later, and so I took off my pump cover because, of course, and it looked like I had sleeves on the bottom half of my arms. It still kind of looks ridiculous. Anyhow, we did that, and then afterward, we went to Runyon's in downtown Minneapolis. Those of you who are from here will know exactly what I'm talking about. Runyon's is considered the place to go for wings in Minneapolis. So if you love wings and you're ever here in town and you're staying downtown, it's an easy place to walk over to. Incidentally, I don't think they're the best wings in the city. They're very, very good, but there's a place called Ray J's that I believe is a little bit better. So that aside, I eventually came home, and I was not in what you would call reading shape. It wasn't as aggressive as Friday night had been, but we were on the lake drinking beers, went out for lunch, had more beers. So I came home and I watched YouTube videos and stuff for the rest of the night and just took it easy. And then we get to Sunday. The middle of this whole drama, I met a friend of mine for brunch. There's a bar down the road here that we go to probably twice a month and just catch up, chat and whatnot. We know the bartenders at this point, so it's nice going in and being able to BS with them, talk and whatnot. But because of what's going to be happening with me over the next week or so, and then things that her and her boyfriend have going on, I won't see them for a while. So we, I guess, took what would be two brunches, over a few weeks and smashed them into one, and ended up catching the Wolves game that was on Sunday, which we should have missed by a couple hours. And so that had spun a little bit out of control. And then by the time I got home, once again, I was not exactly in reading shape. So I took it easy for the rest of the night and got to bed at a good time, which is one thing I like about boozy brunches. I don't go out a whole lot anymore, and virtually never at night. And so when I go out and have a boozy brunch, you can come home, you can unwind, drink plenty of water, and still get to bed at a really decent time and be okay on Monday. But then we got into the week. And I just got hammered at work. I don't know what was going on, if people were just trying to get things done before month end and whatnot, but I got slammed all week. So I just wasn't able to make videos. I had some time, but when you're that busy, what little free time you have, you want to spend reading. I was going to sit down yesterday, Friday, and do this, but I just had no enthusiasm yesterday. I even set up the camera, got all the books in order, and was ready to start talking, but I just had no enthusiasm, and I knew the video wouldn't be very good, so I turned it off, went to the gym, and went on with my evening. Today, I am my usual self, I guess. I was up at a good time this morning, had a slow morning, cleaned up around the apartment a little bit, went to the gym, and had a fantastic workout. I do a push-pull legs split, so today was legs, and they were noodles as I was leaving the gym. I almost wanted to take the elevator out, but I didn't, because I can't bring myself to do that. And now I'm here at home, and I thought I'd shoot this video before I finish deep cleaning the apartment. That's what I'm doing today, getting some laundry done. And then when that's all finished, I'm going to try and get out and enjoy a little bit more of this weather. And it looks like it's going to be nice all week, too. So with all that small chat aside, let's get into the books I read this month. And I think I have everything here. I don't actually write down the books that I read. I really ought to start keeping better track. I'll go through phases where I log them, and then I just stop, and I really need to stay on top of it. So I had to go back and watch a few of my old weekend end notes to try to get a decent list of what I had read. I think this is pretty much correct. So the first thing here is Modern Libertarianism by Brian Doherty. This is a really good primer, I think, on the history of libertarianism in America. And in a way, you could say it is a distinctly American philosophy. It's deeply connected to classical liberalism, obviously, but it is, I think, a pretty American philosophy. He does have the 600-page Radicals for Capitalism, which is awesome. I love that book, and if you are interested in the history of political movements, I would definitely read that instead of this. It is a very exciting read. It's a lot of fun. And, there's classic histories of the conservative movement in America. Some of them are pretty readable. Some of them are a little stuffier. This is, whether or not you agree with the philosophy, I think it's head and shoulders above those simply as a reading experience. The larger book is. I suppose this is too. It's just not really comparable. But if you're not up for that, if you don't want to see what sassy letter some libertarian sent to another libertarian about an obscure point of philosophy, if that's too much for you, or you don't want to read about obscure psychedelic libertarians in California in the 60s and 70s, this is going to be the place to go. I think this would be just fine. But as I've read both of those books, and I don't think I need this, I'll probably put this in a little free library and, spread the good word. So that was the first one. And I don't know if these are necessarily in order in which I read them, by the way. The next one is Cross Purposes by Johnathan Rauch. I don't have a physical copy of this. I read this as an ebook. And this book, basically what it's about is you've had the rise of the nuns, right? And Johnathan Rauch used to think that was going to be a good thing, and he's decided it isn't. And his evidence for that is basically, it's more than this, but basically the state of our current politics. And so what he says is we need Christianity to form civic virtue and to support democracy. And right now, Christianity is failing in its job to do that. And his reasons go back to the founders, of course, all the classic arguments we're all familiar with. And though that's interesting and I think wrong, my favorite parts of the book were these letters he brackets it with to an old friend who's passed away. I just think those were lovely, and I went back and reread them. I think twice now. I just really like those. Maybe I'm getting sappier here as I crawl into my 30s. But then also, I really do like his criticisms of post-liberalism on the right. It's a brief part of the book, but I think it has some force. And then also what's interesting to me is him talking about the state of churches right now. And I should say also that his focus here is evangelical Christianity. And he talks about how pastors are really struggling right now. I have it up right here. So, excuse me, he writes, one pastor told me he had almost quit 4 times in the past few years. Referring to parishioners who bring the culture wars with them to church, he said, these guys are a special kind of relentless. Pastors complain so often that it has become a mantra that they get their congregants for 2 hours a week, whereas cable news gets them for 12. I think that's fascinating. And while I don't agree with the premise of the book, I think it's fascinating and really well done. I mentioned when I was reading this book that I am a big fan of Johnathan Rauch. He's over at The Atlantic, and it is really smartly done, and it's done, I think, with sensitivity. But I would be really curious to know what Christians would think who read this book. If you are evangelical Christian, have you seen this in your church? I think that would be really interesting to hear about. To see if your anecdotes line up with what he gives here. And he does give some evidence too. So that was another book I read. And then going on here, we have Abundance by Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein. I also read this as an ebook. Derek Thompson is at The Atlantic, like Johnathan Rauch. I've never been terribly impressed with him. I just don't think there's much depth there. He's a decent writer. His pieces aren't completely shallow or anything like that, but for me, there's never enough there. It seems like he could have spent a few more weeks thinking about what he writes and really grappling with counterpoints. But that aside, there's also Ezra Klein. I do like him better. He's always smart, rarely brilliant. Maybe that's not much of a criticism, how many people are actually brilliant, but I do like reading him, and he's been fascinating to read over the years if you've been keeping up with him. I don't think his politics has changed, but I feel like he's softened a little bit, and I believe, for example, inflation during the Biden administration shook him a little bit, maybe shook his priors slightly, and that partly explains, I believe, the shift in this book. And the point of the book is to have an in-house conversation with other people on the left. So they say, too often when progressives see an issue, a social or economic issue, oftentimes they see them as the same thing. They think, okay, we need to subsidize demand, or we need to introduce regulations to control this excess of capitalism or something like that. And what they're saying here is we need to rethink that. We need to think about the supply side instead and consider that maybe all these regulations we've supported over the years, for example, with the environment, are actually hindering our ability to build, for example, green infrastructure. Now, there is, I think, a type of person who this book would be good for to read, both on the left and the right, actually. Although it is an in-house conversation, they do make comments directed toward people at the right. And let me think how I want to say this. I do think that it is a good part that this book has entered the conversation and a good number of people have grabbed onto it. That being said, I didn't learn a lot from the book. I thought it was a fairly flat reading experience, but I do wonder how somebody who's maybe not in the weeds in this stuff like I am would think about it. I don't believe they would come out saying it was a riveting reading experience. I just think on the level of prose, it isn't. But I wonder if it would get them thinking about issues in a different way. And again, for a certain person on the right who thinks the government can only ever do wrong, and then a kind of person on the left who maybe hasn't considered places where deregulation might be a good idea, or where we might want to emphasize the supply side rather than the demand side. But that being said, I haven't thought about this book a whole lot since I read it. There's 2 or 3 books on here that I wanted to almost immediately reread once I finished it. Johnathan Rauch's was one. This one was not. This one was not. So maybe it would be a good idea for some of you to go see some of the interviews they've done. I don't know if they've done interviews together. I did see a couple Ezra Klein did by himself, and then read a couple reviews and decide if it is something you would be interested in. And it is a fast read. It's not a long book at all, so you wouldn't be out too much with it. And then going on here, we're onto a physical book. I do not have these in order, of course. And this is World War II history as I continue my march through all the single volume histories of World War II. This is Victor Davis Hanson's The Second World Wars. And I just have to say it every time because it's in the title. You can't really avoid it. The Second World Wars, because of course in the Pacific, you can go back to, not from 1941, but rather 1937 is fairly common. And you can trace it further back if you really want to say 1931. And then you have the wars in Europe. You have land grabs in the 30s, and then finally it breaks out on September 1st, 1939 at 4:45 in the morning. And so at what point do these separate conflicts become one, okay? And then, of course, it spreads to the Middle East and North Africa and whatnot. And although we consider the Axis powers as being a few countries and the Allied powers as being a few countries, of course, it included many, many others from New Zealand to many countries in South America and so on. So that's the point there, but it isn't a point he sticks with in the book. I think he makes it in the introduction, and then he kind of drops it. He does make a point later on, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it, that there were, in a way, two wars within World War II. So we could have a demarcation, I guess, in 1943. I think that's a common point to do it, where, especially in the case of the Allied armies, the armies and navies that were fighting then were totally different than the outbreak of the war. I mean, after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. had in the Pacific, I think, 3 aircraft carriers and then 5 more on the East Coast. So 3 aircraft carriers, and then, of course, ships sunk in Pearl Harbor. But then by the end of the war, they built, I want to say, somebody may have to double check this, I think they built 105 aircraft carriers, and that's of all types. Of course, that's not fleet carrier. That's not all fleet carriers. I believe there's 3 types of aircraft carriers. So as you can see, by 1943, once the productive capacities of the United States is really starting to come to fruition, and technology has moved along. There's new types of battleships, there's new types of submarines, right? The Army and Navy that was fighting them was completely different than the one that was fighting in 41 or, with Britain, for example, in 39. So he does make that point too. Anyhow, and at the risk of repeating myself, if you have been watching my previous videos, this book breaks it up itself by talking about the war on land, the war in the air, the war at sea, the economy, warlords, so leaders, right? And that does have its benefits, and especially to newer readers of the subject, I believe. And I keep making this point, but I think that's especially true, or this is an especially good example, with the naval component. If you're taking a chronological history and you're jumping around within 1941, 1942, 1943, you're going to be moving in and out of the Battle of the Atlantic, which is one conflict. So you're not going to have you may not have, I guess, a good sense of the phases of that. Or same with the war in the Pacific, what I was just talking about, the turnover and the change in the fleets and in technology, or the retrograde movement in terms of the Japanese. Although they were able to build, given their economic situation, a fairly impressive number of naval ships and even aircraft carriers during the war, but it just pales in comparison to what the United States could do. And I think that is useful. And then also just how those themes of changes in technology and the size of armies and whatnot is emphasized within each theme is really nice, I believe. So again, I do believe this would be useful for people who are just getting interested in World War II. I wouldn't typically recommend a single volume overview as a way to get interested in the subject, although a lot of people often think that it is. More often than not, it's going to be a keyhole history that does that. I mean, think about the subjects you're most interested in and what got you to really dive into it. it was probably a very specific aspect of it. So for me in World War II, as a kid, I watched a documentary on the hunt for the battleship Bismarck, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I just started reading about that. And inevitably, there's going to be references to other ships, other battles, other parts of the war, and then you say, oh, well, I want to read about that too. So you go to another book and another book. And I think that more often than not is how it happens. So I do want to say that as well. There are issues with this book. With repetition, not always in a good way. For example, sometimes it comes off as laziness or poor editing. It is also a very flat book at times, and that can be a little bit of an issue, so it's not a scintillating reading experience at all, although he's a very clear writer, I'll say that. It's not a struggle to get through this book at all. And there's a few other things. So all in all, it is a good, serviceable history of the Second World War. If it is on your bookshelf and you've been considering it, I wouldn't push you away from it at all. So there we have that. And then what's next on my list? Oh boy, we have another history of World War II, which is very different. This is Scorched Earth by Paul Thomas Chamberlin, and it's a global history of World War II. And this comes out on the 6th, I think it is. And then on the 8th is VE Day, actually. I believe when I first mentioned that I had this book, I was confused about why it was coming out this early in the year. Typically, World War II histories will come out later in the year because then it's going to be ready for the Christmas season, so you can get that for your dad, your grandpa, your uncle, or me. But I believe there's some World War II histories coming out in the next week because of VE Day. This is a very odd book. I won't say as much on it as I might because I did write a review of it and I sent it off, I think yesterday or the day before. So that will probably be up, I suspect, in the next week. And I'll try to let you know or link to it. He takes a view in here, and actually I bookmark a page if you'll excuse me. Although funnily enough, although I have the physical book here, I read this as the PDF. I had the PDF before the physical book got to me, and then when it was here, I was already almost done with it, so I just stuck with that. And while the other ebooks here that I read were classic, Kindle turn paging, there was something about the PDF experience that I really liked. I had it open on my laptop, and I'd be laying here on the couch or wherever I was, and I could just scroll like this with my head back and just reading down. It was so incredibly lazy, but I sort of enjoyed the reading experience. Maybe I'll do more of that. Anyhow, so this is a passage that will reasonably capture what he's saying. So he writes, in broad brushstrokes, this book argues that World War II was colonial in its origins, genocidal in its prosecution, and imperial in its outcome. The roots of German, Japanese, and Italian aggression can be traced back to 19th century imperial politics. Although usually portrayed as rogue states, the Axis powers are better understood as heirs to the grand strategy of empire building through colonial conquest. Expanding on a playbook written by the Western empires, the Axis powers fused concepts of racial hierarchy and colonialism with modern military technology and to launch a series of spectacular offensives across Europe, Africa, and East Asia. This assault overwhelmed the bastions of the international order, toppling the French Third Republic and forcing the British Empire to adopt a defensive posture against the threat of German invasion. Having thrown the world politics into chaos, German and Japanese leaders turned to their next targets, the Soviet Union and the United States. If you guys remember, it's got to be 2 or 3 years ago now. I almost want to say it was 2022. Richard Overy came out with a book. I can see it up there, but I can't read it. I think the subtitle, or maybe Blood and Ruin, that's what it's called. He came out with a book that has a similar premise, that it was a war of empires. However, he says the war ended empires, and he's saying that they just changed their nature. So after the war and going into the Cold War, you had these two super states, right? And then instead of grabbing colonies in the way we usually think about it, they extended their influence, usually not entirely, but usually through softer means, I guess. And then, of course, in the process of the war, as I was talking about before, the Soviet Union built a huge army. I think it was 12.5 million people, and the U.S. was 12.3 million. I might be wrong on that. But then more in the U.S. case, they built this huge navy that could project influence across the entire world. And that helped give character to the coming Cold War. I think it's BS, and I make that point in my review, so I'll just let you read that for those details. While I was really hard on the book, I think I would still recommend it for two reasons. First of all, disagreeing with something isn't a reason not to read it, and I like arguing with a book like this. But then also, when he's not doing that nonsense, it is such a good read. Again, as I said earlier in this video, I'm working through all the single volume histories of World War II, even rereading the ones that I've read in the past, like Victor Davis Hanson's book. And this is some of the most gripping writing that I've come across in those when it comes to just talking about Stalingrad or the Battle of Midway or Leyte Gulf, anything like that. I loved that. And thankfully, more often than not, I think when he's dealing with his stupid 21st century premise, that's weighted towards the beginning and the end of the book, maybe the first and then the last 100 pages. And then when he gets sucked into the narrative of the war itself, it's punctuated throughout. He doesn't ever quite get away from it, but it isn't so distracting. You can just enjoy how he's writing. He is clearly an enthusiast of the subject, and that really comes across. So I loved the reading experience as a whole, even though, there were parts where veins were popping out of my neck and in my forehead and whatnot. So I don't want to totally turn you away from it if it is something that would interest you. Although it wasn't as impressive, I thought, as Richard Overy's book. So there's that. And then moving on here, we have, we have Omnipotent Government by Ludwig von Mises. I just read this late last week, I think it was, on a bit of a whim. Oddly enough, I don't have a physical copy of that book. I really ought to get one. So I also read that as a PDF. And this is Ludwig von Mises' book about, I guess you would just say, Nazi Germany. I was tempted to say, and why I paused there, that it was his book about World War II, but it really isn't. He fought in the First World War with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the year after, I think it was the year after the war finished, he came out with Nation, State, and Economy, which was about that. And then the Nazis came to power, and he had to flee the Nazis, and they actually took his library, but he fled, and then it ended up, I believe, in the Soviet Union, and it was found by Richard Eberlein in the 90s or early 2000s or something like that. But anyway, he fled the Nazis to Switzerland and then to the United States, and he wrote this book in the United States. So he's here in a new country, he's learning a new language, and he's watching the Nazis wreck Europe. And he started the book, I think, in the late 30s. I want to say he started in 1938, but I could be wrong about that. And then it was published in 1944, so before the war had ended. I think it was published earlier in the year, and he finished writing it in late 43, early 44. And what's actually kind of interesting is you can tell when different parts of the book were written. So he'll refer to this new war, and then also his tone is different because the outcome of the war is less certain. And then you can see parts of the book were written when the outcome of the war was, well, more or less certain, and that's sort of interesting. But he makes the point in there that this really is a German war. And then, of course, based on where he was from, he's so familiar with that literature, and his erudition is on full display in this book. That's what he focuses on, looking at economics especially. But while he was an economist, so that's natural, and I think most people who read this book would take his interpretation as being overly economistic. That would be the 10-cent word, I guess. From my perspective, I've read everything Mises has ever written. It's interesting because this is probably his most historical work, okay? And I loved the first part. This is not the first time I've read it, but I love the first part in the book where he was talking about the history just of German liberalism and then the rise of fascism and things like that. I thought that was fascinating to go back to. I haven't read the book in a long time. I am being, I know, vague on the details. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty here, but I would encourage you to read it if it's something that interests you. I think it is one of his most underrated book. Everybody knows socialism, liberalism, human action, but tons of people skip things like bureaucracy or omnipotent government, and I think they're really great. But I loved rereading this, and I might even go back to it a lot again as I keep going through these single-volume histories of the war. He was very much a product of old Germany. He was a 20th century economist, but in style, I still think of him more as a 19th century figure, and his prose are just, it's so good to spend time with. He's one of those authors who I like and admire him in inverse proportion to how much I talk to him on my channel, about him on my channel, and always has been even before I nuked all my videos. He is a favorite author of mine, certainly. I thought there was something else I wanted to say about that, but that's probably enough for now. Okay, and then we go on to Capitalism and its Critics. I finished this, and I did get a finished copy. In my last weekend endnotes, I was complaining about the advanced copy I got and all the errors in it, and I got the advanced copy that day. So I shot that weekend endnotes, I turned off the camera, I did whatever for a few minutes, and then I went down to check the mail, and here it was. So that was happy, and I was able to go back and check and reread some sections in this. But pretty much all of my notes are on the advanced copy, which is currently chained to the radiator in the back room. And I think I'm going to have to spend a lot more time with this book now that I've finished it, go back and reread some parts. Because I can't decide if I was unfair to it or not. In my initial comments, I was saying, okay, this is selling itself as a history of capitalism from the point of view of its critics. But if we take any chapter on a critic, I think the example I gave in my last video was Karl Polanyi. If someone came up to me and said, I want to know who Karl Polanyi was and get a rough idea, a rough overview of his theories, I don't think I would hand them this, and I still don't know that I would. But if we go back to that idea, it's a history of capitalism from the point of view of its critics. So that top layer is a history of capitalism, and you're talking about the issues of it within whatever given dates you're handling. So if we get to where Karl Polanyi was writing in the major issues within capitalism, he's just saying, okay, what did Polanyi have to say with those? I don't know that his point was necessarily to say, here's a really nice overview of Polanyi, the debates that he had, and everything he wrote. So that's kind of what I mean when I say I wonder if I was unfair to it when I was reading it, if I had the wrong expectations. So with that in mind, there are some figures in here where I want to go back and reread their chapters. Actually, a decent handful that I want to reread. That being said, while this is reasonably comprehensive, and by the time I got to the end of it, I was pretty impressed with that, there's still some people in here, just a few, who I don't feel like belong. To me, they still are a footnote, and I can't quite figure out why he put them. I have ideas, but I can't. I don't necessarily have evidence for them, let me put it that way. I can't quite figure out why he included them and then left some others out. But that, given how many people are covered in here, he didn't leave that many people out. So that's maybe not the most important thing about it. So I also won't recommend it or not recommend it until it gets closer to the release date. I want to say, I think I said in my last video the 14th, but this says the 13th. Yeah, it says it's supposed to come out on the 13th, but you may want to double check on Amazon or online before you do that. But I'll try to come back with more definitive comments, or if I do end up writing an interview with it, I'll just point you to that. And then the last thing I have here, if my notes are right, is Mr. Scarborough's Family. I still have the bookmark in here because there's a couple chapters left in the read aloud that Steve Donahue is doing, and I'm listening to those still, and I'm just using that to mark where it is. But I couldn't help myself. I wanted to clean it up before the end of the month because I could, and I couldn't help myself. It was very enjoyable, and then I just wanted the fresh start that comes with the first of the month. This was awesome. I don't know how many of you are reading along. with us, but I don't know. I just had so much fun with this, and I want to do Scarborough, or not Scarborough, excuse me, Trollope, every month now. Just throw something on. We'll see if I actually do that. I have plenty here that I haven't read from him, but man, this was a blast. And largely, I should say this, largely because of Steve. I would read a chapter or chapters when he did a bunch of them, and then listen to his videos afterward and get all his great commentary. I wanted to see if he pointed to things that I missed, or noticed the same things that I did, or felt that it was worth emphasizing the same things that I thought were important. And then also seeing people crop up in the comments section. I loved every second of this. Although in the back here, I was reading the summary here. Okay, I'm not seeing it now. I'm not going to find it while I'm on camera. But they refer to this as the best of his legal novels, and I get why they're saying that. That's definitely the central conflict of the book, I suppose, or what he's using to center it all on. But to me, this was a book about relationships, and that was my favorite part, really, going through it, between people who had fallen in love, people who had fallen out, between fathers and sons, and so on. Those were really uncles. Those were really my favorite parts of the book, and that's what I felt like it was about, rather than the law or something like that. He was just using that to move things along and to base it all around. But I had a blast with that. So I think that is everything I read this month. What is that, 7, 8 books, something like that? I wanted to read 2 more books this month really badly, but yeah, last weekend and this week ruined that. And then this month, I guess we are in May, this month I have a Grand Canyon in the middle of space where I won't be able to get much done, but you will see about that. Anyway, the book I am reading right now, and also that Grand Canyon chasm that's going to be in my month, is the reason I'm not doing a TBR for May. But the book I am reading right now is Lawrence Rees's The Nazi Mind, which comes out on the 6th. So I need to probably finish this between today and tomorrow, I think, if I'm going to write about it. And I've only read the introduction, so I can't say much about it right now. But I do like Lawrence Rees a lot. I have his other book right here, actually. I have Behind Closed Doors, Stalin, the Nazis, and the West. I was going back and rereading sections of this because of Chamberlin's Scorched Earth, not because of this. This is my favorite thing that I've read by him, and I think I've read most of his books. And I picked this up 10 years ago while I was in Europe, probably maybe this week. I was in Europe 10 years ago this week, studying abroad. I studied abroad for a semester, and we did this traveling classroom where we would spend a week to 10 days, sometimes a little bit longer, in a city, and then go to another city and then do classes there. And I went to like 10, 12 countries in Europe, but we stopped at a World War II site, let's just put it that way, and I got this in the gift shop there and read it, on trains and whatnot. Okay, never mind. I was going to go on about Chamberlin's book and how there's some issues between the two, but I won't do that here. He does have other good books, of course. His book on Auschwitz, his book on the Holocaust, his dual biography of Stalin and Hitler, and some other things. I always like him, but this is probably his best. Those are all really good. I don't have anything against them at all, but they don't tend to be groundbreaking, and there are plenty of other books on each of those subjects, whether it's Auschwitz, the Holocaust, or even a dual biography of Hitler and Stalin, that I like better. So he's one of those authors where he's, I don't want to say, I don't even know how meaningful this is, but kind of mid-tier, but the top part of the mid-tier, and then you have those just brilliant, glowing authors. I would say he's in that top part of the mid-tier, but this is one of his best books, I believe. He's very careful, he's very discerning, he's obviously always thinking about these things. You get the feeling that he's a full-time historian. What I mean by that is, I don't believe he ever has that part of his mind turned off. It's not a job. It's not, okay, I'm going to be a historian while I'm working in the library from 9 to 5 or whatever, maybe while I'm just teaching classes. I don't actually know if he teaches. But it's not that. I think he's really thinking about this stuff deeply, and he's doing it all the time. He's a good, serious historian. So I'm looking forward to see how this book is. But hopefully it is like this, sort of above some of his other books, in my mind anyway. Maybe some of you have a different opinion. Maybe I'm shortchanging him, even though I'm praising him. So there we have it. That was my May wrap-up. I am going to go out now. Well, actually, I have to get my laundry. So I'm going to get my laundry. I'm going to go fold it, and then I'm going to, at very least, go on a long walk. Maybe I'll find a patio for lunch, because I don't have anything in my fridge but yogurt. It is very much a single man's fridge right now. So the rest of you, enjoy your weekend. I hope the weather is nice where you are, and you will see me again soon. But where? Have a good one.